This is super surreal being here because I won the IMS Visionaries Award in 2016, I think it was, which was aimed at spotlighting future leaders in the music industry. And so today to actually hold this opening keynote and kind of feels like it's come full circle in terms of this platform. Before I jump in, how many people in this room have bought an NFT before? Or let's start with that. Who's bought an NFT? Okay, it's a good section. Set up a wallet. Does anyone know what a wallet is? Crypto wallet? Okay, good mix. Perfect. So the point, I guess the kind of overlying theme of today will give you a good introduction to what Web3 is, what the metaverse is, and start to touch on some of the interesting concepts that make this space so exciting. I think what's really fascinating is this really feels like a reset opportunity for the music industry in many ways. The business model feels like it's going to change. The infrastructure that powers the future of the music industry will change. And we'll start to touch on some really interesting ideas around tokens and NFTs and DAOs. And there'll be a lot of buzzwords that you'll hear, but hopefully we'll be able to break them down and actually give you a deeper insight on what this means for the future of the music industry. But before we get so far into the future, there will be a lot of sci-fi, fantasy concepts that you'll hear. I wanted to tell you a story about one of the first experiences I had listening to music and hearing the Gorillaz for the first time. I remember hearing and watching everything they released and feeling like this was a different vision of music. There was so much depth, there was characters and worlds, and they even released a game with one of their albums. And it's really interesting, as I started to kind of go through my journey of understanding music, I got more obsessed with artists like that, like Drexciya and Bjork, who had so much depth to their music. It was like they were storytellers. It wasn't just music anymore. It was music, film, technology, all coming together to create this new form of art. And what I find really fascinating is as we kind of fast forward into the modern day and we're talking about the metaverse, I think the electronic music industry has always been there before we even had a word for it. In many ways, electronic music is the soundtrack for the metaverse. So what is the metaverse? There's many different definitions. It means different things to different people. Some people think about it as Mark Zuckerberg's vision of the future with Oculus and working and living in VR. You could go even further. Some people talk about Elon Musk and embedding your consciousness into a chip. I mean, there's really many different fantastical ideas, but you could break it down very simply in these 7 layers. And it's actually just a combination of different technologies that make the metaverse what it is. From the foundational levels of infrastructure, like the actual internet that powers all of this, whether it's 5G, Wi-Fi, all the way up to the experience. And the reason why I think many people find it difficult to describe is because it means so many different things. It's a combination of multiple different forms of technology to create what this new future could look like. One way of thinking about it, for me, is the future of the internet. And really, it's the blurring of lines between digital and physical experiences. But what does it mean for the music industry? The part that I get really excited about is, to me, the metaverse feels like a new canvas for artists to express themselves. And what we'll see are new formats and asset types that bring fans and artists closer together. So formats ranging from things like virtual concerts and digital experiences, all the way to asset types, things like NFTs. All of this will come together to create an interesting new way for people to consume music. And I think fundamentally, it will set music free from these archaic formats of a wave or an MP3 into something much more interesting and immersive. Now, at the heart of this transition, it's really, I think, being pushed forward by 2 key themes. One, game engines, and the other is blockchain. The game engines are really exciting. I mean, how many people in here have heard of the Unreal Engine? Are you familiar with Unreal? Great. I think the Unreal Engine will be talked about in the same breath as we discuss Ableton and Pioneer DJ in the next few years. This is a game engine that allows people to create immersive experiences, not just games, but full-on interactive 3D worlds. And this will be, I think, a really fundamental way artists will think about how they express their vision. And as this technology gets more democratized, we'll start to see really interesting new ways for artists to play with their identity. Not just through the means of avatars, which we'll start to see a lot more of, with artists creating virtual versions of themselves, playing with aliases and different ways to think about how their IP scales. We'll also start to see the launch of new IPs that push music closer to film and gaming. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, we look at the size of the music industry compared to film and gaming. It's bizarre. Like, music is such a fundamental part of our experience of content and entertainment, but it's so small compared to the other two of film and gaming. And I think the metaverse has this opportunity to really help bridge the gap and create interesting new revenue streams that never existed before as artists start to experiment with new types of content. Now, alongside this, what we'll see is the format will really start to evolve. We'll see interesting new technologies like AI and generative algorithms that will change the way music looks and sounds. So, for example, Kanye releasing his album in a stem player is just one example. You'll see multiple other examples of companies like Bronze, where when you listen to the song, every time you go to the website, it sounds different. And it's a really interesting idea to think about music as not just being this fixed file format. It's not just fixed as you hear it. It changes every single time based on context. It could be in the daytime, there's no drums, but when you listen to it at night, all of a sudden there's a bass line. I mean, these are all interesting ideas around how content will change based on multiple different parameters. And we'll start to see personalization taking a key role in how people start to consume music. So that we talked about the experience, we'll start to see really interesting new forms of media, but a lot of this will be powered by this underlying technology of the blockchain, which fundamentally will drive transparency and efficiency in the music industry. Right now, I think most people can agree the music industry is not the most transparent. It's very difficult for artists to have a deep understanding on how their music is really being consumed. And the blockchain will allow for this transparency to really come through. And we'll hear from a number of different companies today around how this will really shape the future of transparency and revenue streams in the music industry. Alongside this, we'll start to hear about interesting new business models on how fans can start to participate in the music ecosystem. And one theme is called fractionalized ownership. And I find it really interesting because this is a new idea at the moment where fans can buy a portion of a song and earn from the royalties. But David Bowie actually released something on this many years ago called the Bowie Bonds, where he released this security that allowed you to basically earn from his royalty streams. And this was done 10, 15 years ago. So although it's a really exciting new concept, it has been done before. And what I find really interesting is we just have new language and technology that will start to democratize these ideas and make it more accessible for everyone to be able to experiment with new business models and new formats of content. Now, we talked about blockchain very highly, and you'll hear some really interesting examples of how people are using this. But fundamentally, one of the really important pieces is ownership is a central piece and idea around why people are so excited about NFTs. And there's an interesting question which we'll ask about. What does ownership actually mean? Like, what does it mean to own a digital asset? And how does that change the way fans and artists connect with each other? And we'll touch on a few different concepts today, one around NFTs, another around tokens. And we'll start to see this interesting trend of platforms launching tokens that start to reward their consumers for being active participants. And so you can imagine that it seems like a very interesting new business model where sorry, I just couldn't hear myself doubling up there. We'll start to see this interesting new style of behavior as fans start to go to platforms that reward them through tokens. And that means it's a really interesting new dynamic where fans are actually now participating in the commercial upside of being a consumer in a platform. And so it's a fascinating theme, and we'll touch on it later today. So what does ownership really mean in Web3? And what happens when the fans and the artists actually own the underlying platform or the project? I'll show you one example of a project we launched last year with deadmau5 called Heads, which was 5,000 generative NFTs that could be used across multiple different platforms. So I'm sure most people have seen different NFT projects. What happened with this is we basically launched these NFTs, and you'd also get a 3D file that that you could use in multiple different games. But the most exciting part was once fans actually had these 3D assets, they started building their own technology on top of this project. So one of the things that launched was a web AR camera that was built by the deadmau5 community. And it's a great example of fans starting to build their own applications on top of the NFTs. This wouldn't happen in the traditional world. right? You would launch something, you'd put it out there in the ecosystem, and it's a very one-way relationship between the artist and the fan. With NFTs, it's more like an open source framework. The NFTs can be viewed as like a building block, and fans can start to take this in any direction they want. And what I find really interesting is, when was the last time we've seen an example where your fans start to build technology for you because they find the project really exciting and they have different ideas around what they want the NFT to be? So we'll touch on this later today and show you some examples around how NFTs will start to open up interesting new waves of innovation, and that will be largely powered by the owners of the NFTs, the community. The part of this ecosystem and this new world of Web3 and the Metaverse that really excites me is it feels like this is the most multidisciplinary era that we've ever lived in. I'm having conversations on a daily basis where there's managers, economists, AI experts, game designers, all around the table talking about what the future of music can look like. And it's very rare to have that experience and for everyone to actually sit around a table and discuss this new future. And it's what I find the most interesting is this whole multidisciplinary approach will start to unlock really interesting new ideas around innovation and how the music industry will evolve. And collaboration is really one of the most important pillars here to driving this new future forward. I get really excited because I feel like our genre has always been at the forefront of innovation. It's our fans that are the early adopters and our artists that are really the most experimental creative visionaries in this space. And as I mentioned earlier, I think electronic music really is the soundtrack to a lot of the ideas that define what the metaverse really is. And to summarize very quickly on where I think that this new future is going is, I feel like the metaverse is more than just technology. It's a mindset. There's a lot of philosophical ideas that you'll hear today which separate themselves from the technology. They seem very big and broad. And it's why it's so interesting and exciting, because this feels like it's more than just tech. This feels like it's actually an idea that will change the future of content. To me, the metaverse is a space that allows us to think about what the rules of society can be, and it's a place for us to share ideas about the future. It's a new medium to reinterpret what creativity means, and an opportunity to create financial freedom that we've never seen before. I think it's collaboration more than competition, which is one of the things that people get really excited about, is in the old world, two platforms that are chasing the same audience might be viewed as competitors. But in this space, it's, hey, why don't we figure out how we can collaborate? How can we use the same standards to shape this new future? And it means transparency, openness, and most importantly, futurism. And I think futurism is electronic music fundamentally. And it's why we, as a culture and a genre, I think, have a right to be at the forefront of this new reality. Thank you.